Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair Yunus, and this week's episode is going to be quite interesting from a perspective of what's going on in the subcontinent and in South Asia. I'm sure all of you are aware by now that Pakistan and India are on the brink once again, following a terror attack that killed about 25 tourists and civilians in Indian administered Kashmir, following which India has vowed revenge. It has put the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, and Pakistan has responded pretty much in a quid pro quo manner, but also put forward the idea that it also has the right to hold the Shimla Agreement in abeyance, and it shall do it as well in the future if it needs to. But what it also said was that any attempt to divert or reduce the flow of water into Pakistan by India would be considered an act of war. So as we speak, this is Friday morning Eastern time. We to date have a ceasefire that is broadly intact at the line of control, but all indications are that we may see some form of kinetic or military reaction from India following what it claims was a Pakistani sponsored terror attack in Kashmir. When these things happen and when I have questions around foreign policy or security issues in the subcontinent, particularly around India and Pakistan, I always reach out to my dear friend Muhammad Faisal, who's joining us here today from Australia. Faisal is a national security researcher and expert on the strategic stability slash instability cycles between India and Pakistan, and somebody whose brains I frequently pick when somebody like me, who's well versed on the economic side, needs guidance on what could happen in the era of or in the realm of national security, geopolitics, nuclear stability, etc. So, Faisal, welcome to Pakistanomy and thank you for taking out the time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah.
I want to
So,
begin with, something we've been talking about for a number of months now in our phone conversations and WhatsApp conversations, which is this was something we saw coming a mile away. A lot of people that I talk to, are like, "Ye kab hua? Kaise hua? Why did it happen now? What happened here?" And I was like, guys, like, some of us who follow this, or at least people I follow and I follow their analysis, had been pointing to this growing escalation rhetoric on both sides of the border, in particular on the Pakistani side, from following what it claimed was, increasing amounts of attacks or increasing amounts of instability that the Pakistanis claim India was fomenting on Pakistani soil. That includes assassination campaigns as well as the Jafar Express attack from March 11th, which is, in my mind, the key inflection point. But I would love your perspective on what are the key events in the run up to where we are now. And did this surprise you?
thank you for that elaborate question. As you rightly mentioned that for those who were tracking it, there were already blips on the radar, if I were to put it that way, that it doesn't surprise me. The reason it doesn't surprise me is because a about 4 years ago, we reached a ceasefire agreement. 2 years prior to that, we had a seismic event in the India-Pakistan relationship or India-Pakistan conflict history, which was India's unilateral move to change the status of Jammu and Kashmir. Uh, Surprisingly, Pakistan was all jaw on that. Like rhetoric was there, Pakistan downgraded the relationship, but materially, Pakistan did not make any political move that would match that. And Pakistan, in a way, accepted that. Pakistani reaction was it renamed the Kashmir as illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Beyond that, that doesn't change much anything. Uh, yeah, about 1.5 years later, a ceasefire agreement was concluded between two sides on the line of control. All good. That came out after back channel between the security establishments of the two countries in UAE, and there is ample reporting on that. And that was on Pakistani side was led by the army chief and the DGIS at that time. On the Indian side was the prime minister's closest confidant, NSA, Ajay Dawal. He was directly negotiating with the Pakistani side, and India had an incentive to conclude that ceasefire agreement because at that time the India-China border standoff had escalated. So India wanted respite on one front. Pakistan agreed to give that. So that set a minimum floor there. Okay, the whatever happened in 2019, we are willing to take a pause here. Come 2024, we start hearing reports in media about random assassinations of former militants linked with groups uh, across Pakistan. They happen in Punjab, in Sindh, in Kashmir. They were India-centric militancies, those who had disbanded even, those not active, those who have shifted to the other side, because Pakistan was at that time under the radar of FATF, and those groups were put on pretty tight leash. So that was a new front in the India's campaign. And when we saw in mid of 2024 significant deterioration in India-Canada relationship, and there was one incident that also had linkings in the one planned hit in the New York as well. So that brought about international reporting. So Pakistanis took advantage of that. They went to the Washington at that time and engaged the U.S. security establishment. There is ample reporting in Washington Post on that. Uh, what happens next? What happens next is in late 2024, uh, the Baloch militants in Pakistan, they start waging a mini military grade war against the Pakistani security forces. Their tactics, they are sharper, they are being advised by pretty uh, well well experienced men. Uh, One can say that they got combat experience over the years of fighting. One can say that they had access to weapons from Afghanistan. Fine. But when the attacks took place in Balochistan on Pakistani military and paramilitary, Indian media celebrated them. BGP's media celebrated them. And as you mentioned about the Jafar Express attack, now that was a shocker for the Pakistani security establishment. And then we started hearing the rhetoric, uh, Balochistan and Kashmir, they are equal.
In fact, if we talked about this the day after, I remember, where the ISPR statement was the rules of engagement have changed, if I
Yeah,
paraphrased it
exactly.
correctly.
Yeah. So, and when rules of the game change, what do they look like? And also, uh, when the ceasefire was there, and for 5 to 6 years, Pakistan had kept all those groups on tight leash. And India had the opportunity to expand its security footprint, the internal security footprint in Kashmir. So whatever happens next is on Indian security system. There's a security lapse there. When incidents happen in Pakistan, we call out the Pakistani security establishment saying that there is a security lapse. So it goes both ways in that sense. Well, Pakistani security establishment has been saying for at least a decade plus consistently that the BLA and other Baloch militant groups, they enjoy support from the Indian establishment. And in 2016, if I'm not wrong, yeah, if I recall correctly, they captured one Indian spy as well. But still, Pakistan, political opinion in Pakistan was skeptic on the claims of the extent of Indian support to that. And there were questions raised about the Pakistani military's conduct of the waging war there and that conflict. But over in Kashmir, from 2019, we saw that Pakistan's policy wasn't what people expected Pakistani policy to be in 2019. There was restraint exercised. The rules of the game changed not in March 2025 with the DGISPR statements. Rules of the game changed with the assassination spree on the Pakistani soil. It is one thing to conduct attacks or assassin killings in Kashmir. It is another thing to go on a spree in Punjab and Sindh.
And so
And
if I were to follow on that, right? So from our perspective, I think you and I agree on this, and a lot of people have different views, particularly across the border in India in particular, but and also in Pakistan that this is one side is much more to blame than the other, and we don't want to get into the blame game. But the fact is that this is a proxy war that the two countries have been engaged in for a number of years. And if I hear you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the change of tactics in the form of assassinations in the form of heightened material support to the Baloch insurgency, and perhaps this view that all of this could happen without any major reactions from Pakistan because Islamabad and Rawalpindi were weak, is essentially what has caused a change of strategy and an end to the restraint, quote unquote, if you were to call it, from Rawalpindi on this issue.
Because you're right, Delhi assessed that Pakistan, broadly the Pakistani political establishment and the military establishment, the political system, there was in a state of paralysis. What we saw with the post-ouster from Imran Khan, that there was a political conflict emerged between PTI and the military, and 2022 was consumed by who will be the next army chief, a succession crisis. 2023 was about averting a default. And Delhi assessed that they are pinned down. So why not go and hit them while they are down? Well, the other side might be down, but they're not out of the game.
So if I also then ask one follow-up before we move on to where we are now, is how much of a change from your analytical perspective should we be, how much of a attention, or if I were to rephrase this, should we be paying to the fact that General Bajwa, in many cases, as far as I've heard and you've heard and many of us have heard, wanted some kind of rapprochement with India and wanted a deal with India. General Munir is, from even the domestic political lens, is cut from a different cloth. In your analysis, how much of that change in personality plays a role here?
Uh, Pretty much quite a lot. See, General Bajwa, when he came in, he supported PTI and Imran Khan's election and brought them into power in some ways. And he had that idea that when I have a comfortable government and a prime minister in Islamabad, I can make international moves. I can engage more confidently. And he thought that he could get a deal done. And he tried to align the military to that view as well. And we saw that in 2021 and 2020's back channel. The ceasefire was outcome of General Bajwa's desire to improve relations. That was that. General Munir, he inherited a different set of circumstances. From the get-go, he was involved. He has been consistently dealing with a battle of political legitimacy and to establishing control and cementing his authority. He has done that. We are past that point where his hold on governance and command was shaky. We are past that point. And we are past the point that the political system could be reshaped, rejigged, because the elections took place last year. The new reality has set in. It's been elections took place in February. We are speaking at end of April, almost 15 months now. So a new reality has set in. Nobody is talking about again an election cycle. The election cycle next is 2029. The next big event will be November 2020, 2027, when the next army chief is to be selected or General Munir gets an extension. That places the political system, the political stability side on a pretty decent footing in a sense that that confusion, that paralysis and decision making that was there in 2022 and 2023 is no more there. And part of it is also borne by is an outcome of Pakistan's being part of the IMF program. There is certainty there, and Delhi misread that. 2025 is not what 2023 was when Delhi decided to go on a assassination spree.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to talk about where we are right now and what the options are on the table. In 2019, we saw airstrikes. In the midst of those airstrikes, an Indian jet was down. An Indian pilot crashed on Pakistani soil, Abhinandan. He had famously a cup of tea and very quickly was sent back home. And things de-escalated. And as there has been plenty of reporting at that time, the UAE played a key role in that de-escalation because the next step up on that escalatory ladder was probably going to be an exchange of missiles. For those of you who don't know, and maybe you can correct me if I get any of this wrong from my education from you, is that the time lag is so short when a missile is launched across the border that really there is no way to know that this has a strategic nuclear warhead on it or not. And therefore, you are in a prisoner's dilemma, and in a prisoner's dilemma, game theory will tell you that you're going to also do the worst thing because you're unsure what the adversary is doing. And that's a very dangerous for those people who kind of don't follow these things. I want to lay this out ahead of time before Faisal gets into the weeds here, that this is not like just lobbing a pataka here or there. This is like real stuff that can lead to nuclear warfare because either side is unsure of what is on that warhead, and probably you have a couple of minutes at most before that missile lands on enemy soil and hits somebody. With that, Faisal, and the lessons learned from 2019 and what happened post surgical strikes, what are the options on the table now? Let's start with India, because it, of course, has promised retaliation in the Prime Minister's speech in Bihar as well. He's talked about this. What can they do here that is materially different or does something that perhaps sets a new tone or creates new deterrence for Pakistan?
Interesting. Before I get to that, I can give you one example to make audience understand what do you mean by the distance being shorter. We saw in many movies that when during the Cold War and even after that, when the escalations are most famously the Cuban Missile Crisis, when escalation happened between the USSR and the US, because they're geographically apart, it takes about 30 minutes for a missile launched from Moscow or Washington to reach each other's capitals. It takes about 128 seconds for a missile launched from Islamabad to land in Delhi or vice versa. So do the calculations there.
Yeah.
It's a little over 2 minutes. So, and in 2022, we had an example that an Indian missile that was unarmed, that didn't have a warhead on it. It was the Indian military was doing the training. They were testing it on their side, but it ended up landing on the Pakistani side. And Pakistani Air Force
This is
picked it
the
up.
famous BrahMos missile incident,
Yeah,
where
famous BrahMos missile.
Indian investigations then and Indian media reported that the button was pressed by mistake and the missile was
Yeah,
launched.
and they punished, or they claimed to punish an Air Force unit for that.
Yeah.
And Pakistanis were the one who brought it out in first that, hey, there's a missile that has landed. We need an explanation what happened. So we are dealing with that sort of territory there. Because of even the forces are eyeball to eyeball, it's literally there is no distance on the border. So that's the situation there. The options: A, BrahMos. BrahMos is a supersonic missile. India says it can carry conventional warhead. You cannot intercept that. And
Can the
that
BrahMos carry a nuclear warhead as well?
technically any missile can carry any type of
Okay.
warhead. It's how you declare it. India has declared that BrahMos carries conventional warhead. India has exported BrahMos to Philippines as well. So most likely they carry conventional warheads. But India can decide at some point that if it wants to evade any missile defenses, it can place nuclear warheads on BrahMos and launch it. You only learn what's on the warhead after it has detonated hit the target site. That's it. Uh,
Okay, so
the,
if option A, let's go. I'm going to keep interrupting you because I have a lot of questions as we
sure,
go
sure, sure,
through the
sure.
options here. Option A, BrahMos missile, where target selection, what would they be looking
See,
at?
target selection could be so target selections could be like military bases, airfields, command centers. If you want to target directly the military side, or you can pick up some, say, what India would consider to be the facilities of what India would say would be the terrorist groups' bases.
Would they hit Murid ke LET's base?
See, the case there is, do you want to go across the line of control or do you want to go across the international border?
Okay,
It has two different implications.
okay.
India's rhetoric for past 6, 7 years is they want to take back Pakistani side of the Kashmir. When you go into the Pakistan proper, that is you are violating the line of control and directly declaring war. That is a different set of consequences.
Got it. So
While
option A,
Pakistan,
BrahMos has all sorts of phantoms within that Pandora's box.
yeah, but it has Pandora's box there. Uh, in any case, if BrahMos comes, Pakistan would absorb the strike and then retaliate. If it comes from across the international border, the strike would go across the international border. If it comes to Kashmir, strike would go back to Kashmir.
And what would be the weapon system Pakistan would then deploy?
Pakistan can opt for cruise missiles.
Okay.
Pakistan can opt for JF-17, F-16, J-10Cs launched standoff range cruise missiles. It's called Rad. Pakistan has declared that that's a nuclear launch missile, but it can carry both conventional and nuclear warheads. If Indian BrahMos comes with a conventional warhead, the next one will go back with a conventional warhead.
And if,
On the
correct me if
escalation,
I'm wrong, Pakistan's perspective, stated perspective, I was also listening to Ijaz Haider yesterday because he said it and that stood out to me, and I would love confirmation from you on this. The stated strategy has been it's going to be tit for tat plus a little bit more if you do
yeah,
that.
plus a little bit, plus a little bit
Okay.
more, plus a little more because A, we don't want to go more. We are done with there. We don't want to play round one, round two, round three. We are plus. You did, we did a little bit more. Take the off ramp.
Okay. So in the case of BrahMos, Pakistan has cruise missiles as options and
Pakistan has
other,
the cruise missile options.
and Air
Uh,
Force.
yeah,
Uh,
Air Force air
with,
launch cruise missile, and you can also launch them through road mobile.
okay.
The Babur can be launched through road mobile, but India would take that as a nuclear signal
Okay.
because
Interesting.
Pakistan has always tested Babur in a nuclear role.
Got it.
Yeah.
Option
So
B.
option B is airstrikes. A repeat of 2019 standoff range that gives you ranges of 200, 250 kilometers. Pakistan can match that. What happened in 2019 was India said that they launched missiles from a standoff range into the Balakot. Technically, Balakot was in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa territory, but
That's across the
they said
international border.
that's across international border, but that was adjacent to Azad Kashmir. There is a Pakistani dilemma when responding. That is, while India, when it strikes across here in Kashmir side, it wants whole of Kashmir. So it makes sense for India to attack on this side. On the other side, there is a Muslim population that is in majority. Pakistan cannot attack the civilian population, civilian Muslim majority population that Pakistan considers to be on its side. So
Hmm.
Pakistan's target selection then comes down to the military targets of the Indian Army, Indian Air Force bases, command
Which the
posts of the Indian Army.
Pakistanis would argue is fair game because the
Yep,
other side engaged in a military action, right? So that
yep,
would
yep, yep.
fit for that.
And that's what happened in 2019 as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be repeatable. Number three, we haven't seen how it plays out, would be drones and counter drone barrages.
What kind of
What happened?
capacities do both sides have on that?
Both sides have fairly decent ones, I would say. India has the US origin drones as well, MQ-9s and others, Reapers. India can launch those drone strikes, evade radars. Pakistan has the Chinese and the Turkish ones. But
Hmm.
uh, it is one thing to launch, like Pakistan has used drone strikes against the TTP. It is one thing to launch against a uh, insurgent group or a terrorist group that doesn't have an air force. It is another other thing to engage in drone strikes. It applies to both India and Pakistan against an adversary that has a capable air force and a missile defense system, air defense system, sorry. So it has that limitation as well.
Okay. Any other options?
Any other option is artillery barrages. You rip off the LOC ceasefire. We saw this playing out in 2014, 2015, when LOC and the working boundary was pretty hot, pretty intense. They were shelling on each other's military posts, and India was shelling the civilian population on this side as well. That and LOC option, it can turn out to be playing over the weeks and months without an off ramp. But it's a low intensity artillery duels that continue.
So on that one, I think if I'm reading the rhetoric in Delhi and in India correctly, I don't think artillery barrages or an end to the ceasefire is going to calm the anger down, which is baying for
Uh,
blood right now.
See, on that, how the next couple of steps that Pakistan takes, or Pakistan has indicated that it can take, how they go, they will tell us a lot. The LOC that is on the ground today is an outcome of the Shimla Agreement that Pakistan has said that it can and shall hold in abeyance. And Pakistan's statement came before India actually communicated to Pakistan that it has suspended or held in abeyance the IWT, Underwater Treaty.
So help the non non-technical people
Yeah.
understand, what are the implications of holding the Shimla Agreement in abeyance? What does that
Uh,
really mean?
so a bit of history lesson, give me like 90
Yeah,
seconds
of
here.
course.
Uh, the Shimla Agreement actually is an outcome. It was concluded after the 1971 war. So after every war between India and Pakistan, there was one agreement that was concluded. After the 1948 war, there was the Karachi Agreement, on, concluded on 1st of January 1949. That produced a ceasefire line between Indian and Pakistani military in Kashmir. That meant that without recognizing each other's control over that area, which they were holding, wherever they were, they ceased hostilities and that line. And that was demarcated on the maps. In 1965 war, in Kashmir sector, there's some territory, India gained in some sectors, and some places Pakistan gained the territory. But when the Tashkent Agreement was concluded to formalize the ceasefire, both parties went back to the ceasefire line ceasefire positions they were holding before the start of the war.
So they went
But
back to the 49 position.
yeah, they went back to the 49 position.
Okay.
But that did not recognize each other's control over the territory they were holding. The 72 outcome of the 71 war was different. Shimla Agreement, they changed the name of ceasefire line into line of control, which translated into I recognize your control over this area and you recognize my control. And for all practical purposes, what we saw in 1999 was international community, China, United States, UK, and everybody, they told both sides to respect the line of control. It has kind of emerged as a de facto line separating both sides. And
So it's
Musharraf's
almost
whole
like
point,
if I were to say in very economic terms, right? It's like 49 was almost like a verbal agreement of sorts that says, okay, for now I'm here, but it's my word
yeah,
against yours. Shimla sort of said like, hey, we have some level of like witnesses around here that kind of say we are here and we recognize your control.
yeah,
And if you were actually to be in a border, that would be a contract that kind of like says this is
yep,
set
but
and we
yep,
agreed to it.
yep. And 49 was more like, for now, we are here. We both know. If we fight again, if somebody else takes the territory, okay, you can redraw the line. 72 said, where we are, without fighting, this is where we will stay. And after 72, we haven't seen a full-scale war. Kargil was limited in one sector. And even when Pakistani troops went other side, they withdrew down. That showed that you can't hold the territory on the other side.
Mhm.
To both sides, then. Siachen is a atypical aberration in the sense that Siachen, the region, it's in the glacial regions up in the high mountains. That wasn't demarcated in 1949. Nobody thought that Indian and Pakistani troops would go up there. And if you read history, in 1983-84, both Pakistani and Indian army, they were engaging with the rival Swedish firms for the mountain gear because both were expecting the other side to make the first move to go to Siachen. But that's an aberration. Uh, so if Pakistan withdraws forms or Pakistan suspends the operation of the Shimla Agreement, that means Pakistan is indicating, hey, we don't recognize LOC, line of control. That means LOC is dissolved, ceasefire is gone, it's an open season. India will be at a disadvantage right now. Earlier, it was disadvantage Pakistan. But since India has, in the past 5 years, had an active border dispute with China, which is not demarcated on the border, both sides don't agree where each other's perception of the LAC is. If people read on the line of actual control, there is a line of actual control, then there is a line that is India's perception of a line of actual control, and then there is a Chinese perception of the line of actual control. There are three or four lines that they are talking about.
And so if you go down that path with Shimla, then you are in
Yep,
that Chinese problematic situation on
yep. You
another
can
front, essentially.
essentially in some sectors, Pakistani army can capture a kilometer or two. In some sector, Indian army can capture 1 kilometer or two. And then there will be long border standoffs, negotiations for buffer zones, and all that.
And then if I, again, I want to game this out before we go to the off-ramps part, just in a minute. Um, the thought I had as you were explaining this was, okay, then if the border is not recognized as a line of control, which Shimla puts in stone, um, and if we look at where the world has gone over the last few years, let's take Russia, Ukraine. The Russians say, hey, these are not our guys who are going across into Crimea, and this was always our land in any case. We don't recognize the border, but it's not the Russian military that's doing anything here. From my perspective, if that's become normalized and if the United States is accepting Russian claims over Crimea and other regions in the Ukraine, saying borders actually can be redrawn like this in Europe, my view is that precedent then opens a new can of worms, given where we are in the global environment, with the line of control gone, if that were to happen.
Yeah, but line of control, even right now, is not an international border. It's still a disputed region. It is that in 72, both sides agreed that we will respect it.
Yeah. But if respect goes away, then you can kind of see the Russian Ukraine
Yep,
type
yep.
situation emerge,
You
right?
can see their line of control dissolving, and you can see the Kashmir and India-Pakistan relationship going back to 1949 and 1950.
With nuclear weapons this time around. There were no nuclear weapons
Yeah,
back then.
exactly, exactly. And that opens a lot of space for extended artillery duels and extended conventional engagements. In 90s, we saw both sides. There were regular skirmishes between Indian and Pakistani military on the line of control. They were fighting for each some post here, some post there. Uh, but both sides respected the line of control eventually.
Hmm.
With that dissolving, the hawks on both sides can claim, hey, it's an open season now, and you can go ahead and capture some territory. And other side will also do that. But India would be at a disadvantage. Does it want to get bogged down there while it is dealing with similar threat situation with China? So that's something that India has to worry about. But what India did in 2019 and what Pakistan is threatening to do with Shimla right now, Pakistan should have done that in 2019. That was the matching political response that Pakistan didn't give.
Which again would, some would say the sign of weakness, others would say was a sign of restraint. Either which way, from the
Either
Pakistani
which way,
calculus
but
point, we are past that now, essentially, is
yeah, we
how
are
they're
past that point.
interpreting.
We are essentially past that point.
Okay. So now let's come to the last bit of our conversation because as you sketched this out, where we are is on the brink. And where we are is in a very dangerous phase of India-Pakistan relations that in many cases, as you've explained it, I don't think to date has been fully appreciated about how dangerous this moment is, given the drawback or the pullback from Shimla, given the pullback from the Indus Waters Treaty, given the rhetoric on both sides of the border, particularly in India following the terror attack in Kashmir, and given the politics involved on both sides, right? Both men in this case, General Munir and Prime Minister Modi, are in many ways, I would argue, prisoners of their own rhetorical machines, and getting out of that is going to be very challenging. So, with that said, what's the off ramp here? How do we get out of this before we end up in a situation where the line of control is gone, the ceasefire is gone, we're back to 1949 with nuclear weapons on both sides of the border?
See, the off ramps, the history tells us that whenever India and Pakistan's standoffs and crises emerged, before nuclear weapons came into play, after nuclear weapons came into play, the external actors got engaged. In 1989, 1990, there was a famous escalation on both sides of the border. Indian Army was conducting exercise. Pakistanis moved. Uh, the later who became the U.S. Defense Secretary, he led a mission actually. Bill Gates, oh sorry, Robert Gates, and he talked to both Pakistanis and Indians, and the intentions were brought down. Later on, post 2001, after a parliament attack, we saw the extensive engagement by the UK and the US and all that. And as you said, in 2021, the back channeling was by UAE in 2019 and 21. Now, the problem is one of the reasons this can get pretty quickly out of hand is the US is distracted and it has less interest in foreign entanglements. And what it leaves UAE and Saudi to pick the ball. And they have an interest in doing that, but they are not trained and well versed in crisis management with India and Pakistan, the two nuclear actors.
Well, it's historically always been the United States.
Yeah, because United States has access to the technical means, the satellite imagery. It can keep track of both Pakistani and Indian moves. To do crisis management, you need to have insights on information on what the other both sides are doing when you go and talk to them. And right now, Pakistan also believes that the US is on India's side. So that also complicates a bit of crisis management efforts. But be that as it may, because that's the world we live in. The off ramps are both India and Pakistan talking directly. The 2021 ceasefire agreement came out after both sides talked directly at the senior security levels. In 2019, when you said that after Abhinandan was caught, uh, there were round two was missile exchanges that India had threatened. Technical detail is, a little bit anecdotal detail is, the Indian RAW chief, he called Pakistani ISI chief and threatened missile barrages. And your guess is as good as mine. Who was the ISI chief then? General Munir. And he must remember that threat.
Mm.
Your experience is what you bring to the table when you are in that level of decision making.
And that threat,
Uh,
probably one would argue, right, that if General Munir is who we think he is, which I have a sense of what kind of person he is post his ascent to the army chief and how he's handled the domestic crisis, he's probably built contingencies around
yeah,
this
yeah, of
issue.
course. Of course, he has built contingencies. He has thought through, he's war gamed it because he dealt with the 2019 crisis. It's been very rare that an ISI chief who dealt with the India-Pakistan crisis went on to become an army chief. General Kiani did that as a DGMO,
So would
2001-2
it then
crisis.
be, United States is distracted. I don't even know if the Trump administration has any serious people with South Asia chops in sort of their inner
Yeah, so
circle.
far.
So would it be, I'm just thinking like in terms of personnel, the only person whose name comes to my mind is Steve Witkoff again, because he's close to the Qataris, he's close to the Saudis, he's played a
But
role
his
with the
plate is full.
exactly.
His
He's
plate
like
is
is in Moscow. Then he has to
yeah.
go to Israel. He has to deal with Iran, and now one more thing.
Uh, but here is a data point. When 2019 happened, it was Trump 1.0. And the day Balakot strike and the day after when Pakistanis caught the Abhinandan, that happened. You know what other global event was happening in parallel? Trump and Kim Jong-un's meeting. I think that was in Singapore. Yeah, yeah, they were
Yeah,
in Singapore.
the big
Yeah,
summit
and
after
the
Rocket Man.
yep, big summit. And the Trump's team got engaged from Singapore, and they talked to both Pakistanis and Indians, or as Mike Pompeo has written. They spoke to
Hmm.
General Bajwa, they spoke to Prime Minister Modi and his advisors.
So this could be Marco Rubio's moment to shine, basically.
It could be Marco Rubio's move, but this movement comes when there is round two of kinetic action.
Yeah.
So that you want to prevent further escalation, you want to give both sides off ramps.
So if I were to
But
then conclude, right, in a way that you've laid this out, you need an off ramp. The United States is distracted. People close to the president have their plate full. The Saudis and Emiratis have played a role. They have an interest here, but they're not the big players here in terms of
yeah,
getting these two countries to engage. You need the United States essentially. Um, so from what I'm hearing from you, the baked in perspective, as far as your analysis is concerned, is we at least have one round of military kinetic action coming in this cycle.
most likely, yes. Most likely, yes. It can take like a couple of weeks or so, but it will happen. On the off ramp, I would say that what the UAE or the Saudis can do is they can facilitate back channel talks between Pakistanis and the Indians at the highest levels. And when I say highest level, I mean on the Pakistani side, DGISI, Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Minister, and on the Indian side, a National Security Advisor, Minister of External Affairs, and the RAW Chief on a what do both sides want to do with the India-Pakistan relationship? and how do they look at next 20 to 30 years? Because, see, with IWT and Shimla both being thrown up in the air, the political foundation of managing the Pakistan-India conflict and the relationship is being tinkered with. So when you are going that route, you also need to have kind of like an understanding of each other's perceptions, how far each other, both sides are willing to go.
Because you're entering a realm where, let's be honest, none of the key actors were key actors back then. So they don't know how to deal with
Yeah,
going back to
yeah,
the 49 situation.
yeah. Going back to the 49 situation. Uh, there is another part of India-Pakistan bilateral or military relationship that both sides have not touched so far. That is the military nuclear CBMs, confidence building measure. For example, whenever there are conventional exercises, both sides gives each other advance notification. Whenever India and Pakistan test missiles, ballistic missiles, not cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, they give each other advance notifications. If the round two and three happen and things were to really deteriorate, then those kinds of engagements, communication channels on the military side, they would be suspended.
I mean, round two, forget about round three, as you've explained it. Round two, if you're a decision maker, we can game this out. You're in the
Mm.
Islamabad camp, I'm in the Delhi camp. Round two is missile exchange. When that happens, neither one of us knows if there's a nuclear warhead on that damn missile.
Yep,
Let's
yep,
be very honest.
yep, yep, yep. But even if it's a conventional missile, how do you recover from that? How do you pick up
Yeah.
the pieces and talk to each other? I mean, like after even a conventional exchange of around if conventional missile exchange, let's say, both sides are gonna have to coexist.
But Chief Faisal, my point here actually is that a round two exchange of conventional missiles is hypothetically sounds okay that it can happen. But my fundamental view is when that missile is up in the air, how do you know if it's a conventional missile?
You will know in 128 seconds.
Exactly. So if you know that and you are on the other side, I've lobbed a missile, you have 128 seconds to
Mm.
react. You're gonna be like, boss, you're gonna go to your boss and be
Yeah,
like, I don't think this is, I'm not sure. And therefore, when
yeah.
you're not sure, you're gonna take the worst case option.
You're gonna take the
And
worst
we
case
are in round
option.
three by then, right?
Yeah, we are in
That's where
round
we
three.
are.
That's where we are, and that has been the uh, risk of Pakistan-India escalation because it can escalate multiple steps on the ladder pretty quickly and without anybody taking off ramps. And right now, both India and Pakistan, they are becoming uh, bogged down in their own domestic audiences rhetoric. They are both looking at the domestic audiences more than they should be looking at risk management and conflict management. I hope right now that both side has some back channel, even if it is at a functional level, not at a high level, that you can at least call somebody, speak to somebody. You can get through a message.
Yeah, I think that's
Otherwise,
been the biggest loss of the relationship over the last few years is those channels have withered away.
yep,
And increasingly, as a result of, I've seen this in the relationship on both sides, because those contacts have withered away, you also then have had a hardening of positions, primarily because of the domestic rhetoric. So you're now bogged down. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy almost, because
partially
you
this
don't
and
have a contact on the other side.
yeah, and partially this, as you explained, and partially is both sides, from where I look at it, they misread the other side's domestic situation. Like India misread Pakistan's domestic situation in the economic crisis. India thought that Pakistan was on the verge of economic default. In practice, in it's all you know better than most, it was a balance of payment crisis. And Pakistan has misread Modi's domestic situation.
Yeah, and I would also argue that in the world we are in with low oil prices and potential Fed cuts, etc., coming up, from an economic perspective, this is the most benign environment for this crisis to escalate for either side because people are distracted globally. There's a trade war ongoing,
Too tempting
inflationary
an
pressures
opportunity
are
to
there.
miss.
there's deflationary winds, and you know what, like cost of doing business and other things are going to be a problem. And what better way to distract your people at this point in time when a lot of other stuff is hitting the fan than
Right in
an
fact.
escalation in two nuclear armed countries, right? You're
Yeah.
going to feed the
Yep.
beast essentially.
Yep. There's one thing as we go down to closing. It looks like Prime Minister Modi has panicked more. He panicked early, he panicked more. And he could be trapping himself there in the commitments, audience commitment.
I mean, so this is where I have a bit of disagreement with you. I don't think he's panicked. I think what's happened is that the scale and nature of the attack is such, especially given the sort of targeting of Hindus that happened. Again, if we go back to your framework of being tied up in your own domestic rhetoric, right? It just fed into that ecosystem that has been created, as a result of which you now have, for example, even Kashmiri leaders in India talking about let's calm the nerves down a bit on this issue of Hindu Muslim. But because of that, it had to be taken seriously, I think, number one. And number two, I think this time around, he had to be seen as responding more aggressively because they've created, and I was watching Ajay Shukla the other day on The Wire, he said it himself, that this false sense of calm and normalcy that has been pushed in the public domain about Kashmir post Article 370 is what is causing this issue, right? Because if you've claimed सब कुछ ठीक है, सब कुछ बेहतर है, and then this happens, you got to be seen as acting because now all of a sudden all your claims are being questioned by your own people.
Uh, then this is more than Pakistan issue. This is a domestic issue that Prime
Yep,
Minister Modi has to handle because with Article 370, that was his signature move.
yep,
And the fallout is for his to bear.
yep.
And in the end, he would have to climb down. That's writing on the wall. It can take few weeks, it can take few months. But between those few weeks to few months, we reach that point. My worry is we might see irreparable damage to the bilateral conflict management, as we say, or a bilateral relationship and its political foundations that
Well,
cannot be weak on can of worms.
on that grim note, it was wonderful talking to you to understand the lay of
Thank
the
you.
land and the options on the table. And again, I think for those of you who tuned in, yes, on social media with memes and jokes and escalating claims and rhetoric on cable news television, you may think that this is non-serious stuff. But as Faisal has brilliantly explained, this is very serious stuff and it can go south very, very quickly for over 1 billion people in the subcontinent. And so hopefully saner heads prevail here. But for now, I think we're in agreement that both sides are locked into their domestic politics and rhetoric, which makes for a very, very dangerous situation here. So with that, Faisal, thank you for your time. And let's see how things play out in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have you back on
Yep.
to analyze how things played out.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun being on the podcast. Thank you.